Well, welcome back to the Techno-Communism Conversation. I am Yohanan Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. I guess I'll start off the show by talking about some books that I've read recently. I very rarely, I don't have a lot of audiobooks playing. I can find the silence deafening otherwise. And also, more to the point, it's been a way that I have been able to have um, pretty significant education in revolutionary thought, liberation thought, which is a strong overlap there to Marxist Leninist thought. There have been revolutions guided by the highest of revolutionary thought in history that have nevertheless failed in spite of that insight. There have not been revolutions that succeeded that were not guided by the highest of revolutionary thought. This is a deal breaker for you if you would become um, a revolutionary in this 21st century. You must be educating yourself, and you would probably say to this, I don't have the time or the resources to track down a lot of books or sit and read. I have so many other responsibilities, and that is, of course, intentional to the uh, within the U.S. Fascistic, far-right, neoliberal, capitalistic, and militaristic systems. You are made to work more hours than dramatically more hours than you need to, and what could otherwise be a high automation society where workers benefit from that automation, let's say. You are pretty intentionally made to be this overworked wage slave. Um, I said on this other show that the chattel slave um, um, of the 1800s had, in certain respects, more free time uh, than most of us do, had less housing insecurity. There was not this scam where working people were frequently prevented from living indoors in the number of many millions. It's about 700,000 by the U.S. official statistics, but those statistics are juked to make the U.S. look better, and also do not, worse than that, do not even include people who are unstably housed, living out of their cars. That's a homeless person living out of their car. Couch surfing. That's a homeless person. Um, Living in situations that they don't want to be in because of the slave system. That's a highly unstably housed person. There's many millions of people who fit that description, and that is quite intentional. That's a neoliberal system. Just as your healthcare is tied unnecessarily to your employment and a for-profit concern generally, to keep you from being able to have the freedom to pursue other things. Um, so, so much of um, American life is this elitist and cruel contrivance, and but nevertheless, you might even just be able to have one earbud in, and if someone says something to you, say, I'm expecting a call. I'm obviously not listening to music, right? That's not the most beautiful music, listening to it in mono in one earbud. So I'm just expecting a call, and don't bother me anymore. And then you can do your other responsibilities, whatever they may be, in most cases, um, while giving yourself a kind of education that you need to stop this wage slave system. It's not merely cruelty and elitism by the standards of the 1800s or 1900s. We live in the 21st century that faces a capitalist climate apocalypse after 2029, according to quite nearly every credible climate scientist. We will have reached runaway overheating, wherein with each passing year, um, the ecosystems of Earth will become less hospitable to human life, culminating in the death of all humankind at some point before a century's end, or the death of many billions, predominantly in the global south. That would be an extension of what's already happening, where many millions of people have died, or many hundreds of millions of people have already been displaced in the global south for your sins, because you don't have the courage to stand up and demand the end of things like the U.S. military industrial complex, the world's worst polluter, whose only real job is protecting other climate criminal super polluters in the form of corporations or states like Israel, which itself, the ordinance that the U.S. predominantly supplies and overwhelmingly guides, steers um, um, uh, this to this pariah state, so-called Israel, occupied Palestine. 5% could be overall the use of ordnance, could be 10% of the total climate crisis in the year 2024. There's never been a thing worse than the fascist United States. I was talking to some folks on the twitter.com of how in the years around 1945, at the end of the Second World War, many Jews in Europe were much more likely wanting to come to the United States than wanting to go to Israel. But the United States leadership viewed Jews at that time as being too socialistic, not a good fit for the fascist United States. And so those efforts to relocate to the United States were um, stymied, oftentimes causing people in concentration camp conditions and very likely to be dead if they were not helped, to then die. This because the fascist United States doesn't want any socialistic person of any background in their country. So they got what they wanted, the fascist United States, in the form of world Jewry shifting dramatically to the right, becoming Zionistic, fascistic, rather than not overwhelmingly socialistic, but skewing socialistic, now more or less overwhelmingly fascistic. Um, this is the influence of this ringleader of anti-communism and fascism of the last century, the fascist United States. It's the influence of other ruling elites of other Western fascist nations, most notably the UK, of course, Germany and France, very bad. Canada and Australia are very bad. One of the books that I've read in recent days, which made an impression, was called Settler Colonialism and the Transformation of Anthropology by Patrick Wolfe, which had a lot of focus in that book on the racist policies of Australia against Aborigines. And of course, these three European colonial states, the United States, Canada, and Australia, are the top three apartheid states in history, uh, um, easily in contention with the ones more ostensibly known as apartheid states, like South Africa, or um, um, uh, or Israel, and the United States having apartheid type policies against Native people that predate the apartheid policies there, um, and um, uh, all of this is mostly denied, just as the effects of U.S. military fascism on the environment are mostly denied. It is more or less the job of the liberal um, to pretend that these problems are not as bad as they seem, or to sometimes touch upon these problems, but not connect them to the primary contradiction of private wealth, financial capital. The United States' original sin of slavery came into being to exploit workers. The new African held in bondage in those decades, um, many decades before 1865, that is the quintessential exploited worker. It's not viewed by in the new African person is not viewed in this way by even many Western scientific socialists or scientific communists, um, because of the Eurocentric paradigm kind of forcing them to um, uh, contextualize these things more in terms of um, some European exploited worker. But the chattel slave is the person having all of their um, their surplus value of their labor stolen from them. So that would then be um, the quintessential worker. Um, the based on these analyses to do with exploitation, which is fundamental to socialistic and communistic thought. Um, but liberal does not look at the world in terms of the actual problems or exploitation. They merely pay some periodic lip service to concerns about people being nicer or somehow living in a better world, but being willfully obtuse as to ending the primary contradiction that leads to all of these problems. So I'd recommend Settler Colonialism and the Transformation of Anthropology. I'll share an audiobook link to that. I also, in just the end of this week, was reading a book called Socialism from Below by Hal Draper. That was a longer work. No, I guess it wasn't longer than the other one that I mentioned, Settler Colonialism. Um, but I didn't finish the last maybe 1/5 of the book because I switched to something else. Socialism from Below is tending to be critical of scientific socialism and scientific communism, state socialistic formations from an ultra leftist position or even a Trotskyist position. And this is always in the spirit of the thing, uh, the world revolution or permanent revolution, the sentiments there, but oftentimes weaponized by forces like this CIA run world, this US intelligence anti communist run world, to undermine state socialism on behalf of fascists on this flimsy pretext of actually just being the better socialist, when, of course, anyone in bed with a thing as evil as a fascist is not the better socialist. But this was a pretty good book um, because it does have insights into the workings of state socialism and the building of um, the better thing, full communism in our time. It's a little strange to me sometimes to see people get bent out of shape defending the USSR. The USSR doesn't exist anymore. It's nothing much to defend. But people who are doing this in the spirit of rebuilding and better envisioning the next state socialism form in their own country or work along those lines. And um, so I'm not generally inclined to be absolutely dismissive of folks like Trotskyists or ultra leftists, and will often read their works and also often read the works of anarchists, um, although more frequently reading the works of more mainline Marxist Leninists. It's important in contemplating something like socialism from below, Hal Draper, to be able, in my view, to glean what wisdom that can be gleaned from these criticisms of state socialism from this cybernetic communist perspective. Cybernetic communist is not dissimilar from the scientific communist, a person who is willing to fight for a humane and sustainable world, and applying the methods and insights of dialectical materialism um, um, to that fight. That is the most important thing to be in this world, in a planet on a planet where human beings will be extinct without such mass organizing. Um, the cybernetic communist differs from the scientific communist only in this recognition that advanced computing, so called AI, is the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history. Thing, other weapons not approximating human behavior, other tools are not able to mimic a human being or become part of a team. You might think that a gun is an important revolutionary weapon, and it is, but a gun is not able to become like a person and do things on its own, as AI agents are increasingly able to do and will be able to do in 2025. And the use of an open source large language model AI agent on a personal level might allow you, if you're a clever person, to rearrange your work life in such a way that maybe you're earning double what you were earning before. It might allow you as a IT freelancer to go from earning $22 an hour to $50 an hour because of the functioning of these agents in your space. And but this means very little on a planet that will still be dead, whether you do that or not, in a few short years. So thus, we come in the cybernetic communist line of thought to the building of the humane and sustainable economic system, which necessarily requires a fight against U.S. military fascism, the $1 trillion a year military industrial abomination of the U.S., and the larger fight against private wealth, which has always been really the same fight for to people who are intellectually honest. Um, and um, and that comes to making use of this little AI friend in a more collectivist way. And I have described this as the building of the open source large language model work group as workforce multiplier, which if it had even some tens of thousands of people in that work group with sort of digital doppelgangers that they are steering, who are able to work tirelessly on their behalf with other digital doppelgangers. This would allow for a work group to put quite a lot of pressure on these offending ecocidal sectors and formations to begin to stop the effects of the capitalist climate apocalypse. And when you have hundreds of thousands or millions, I think that you have the potential to achieve that. I think when you have billions of people in such a formation, you have the formation of a powerful people's superintelligence rather than an incipient superintelligence of some thousands. And that's a thing that could achieve things like universal super longevity or the creations of industrial outputs that are sustainable and able to bring about the betterment of humankind, ending the enslavement and immiseration of the mass of humanity. Um, these outcomes are things that technological accelerationists talk about, but by and large, every word out of their mouth on this score is a lie because they are not um, willing to use this most powerful revolutionary weapon correctly to end the primary contradiction of private wealth, but rather they are basically just regurgitating a CIA talking point about forcing more trickle down economics on people who have already been badly hurt by this, but adding some technobabble into the mix to make it a little more palatable so it can be resold to them. Um, so this is a technologist, even people calling themselves fully automated luxury communists, for example, are really neoliberals. The author of that book, Aaron Bastani, was working for a neoliberal friendly think tank, and his book pretty clearly falls short of calling for revolutionary action. It's more or less suggesting that people wait for the neoliberals to fully automate their economy, and then they will benefit from this luxury communism. That has not happened thus far with automation. Uh, in 20th century standards, many sectors are highly automated or nearly fully automated, such as farming and others. Those farmers, the sharecroppers and people doing this work in the early 20th century did not become independently wealthy, but rather for profit concerns absorbed all of that benefit from high automation, and that's true across these sectors. And workers, new African workers, for example, not only did they not benefit from this by these sectors being held in common to the workers there, um, but they have been blamed for the problems that this system causes. And generally, as I said, there's more precariousness of a housing precariousness for the present day new African who is almost as a rule forced into the situation where they're not allowed to live indoors, or making it highly difficult for them to live indoors. Um, People earning $7, $8, $9 an hour, working 70 hours a week, having to pay rents that are in the many thousands of dollars. That is a less stable housing situation than that of the chattel slave. And that is all intentional, as I said. That is a form of violence, of social murder, and violence targeting working people. The European descended fascist pig is quite happy to harm working people in low wage jobs who are European descended also, because they know that it's doing more harm to the new African and Turtle Islander, the Native American and African American, or other groups similarly targeted, like Chicano people of the United States. Um, and This is not a good system, and nothing good comes of ignoring these kinds of problems, which is what almost all of you are doing. And certainly nothing good comes of the tech accelerationist, which is really no different from the accelerationist. The accelerationist kind of a personality known for this would be someone who was involved heavily in the first um, Trump fascism um, administration, Steve Bannon, um, a lunatic whose ideology and work is responsible for having the UK leave um, the European Union, and the European Union is not a socialistic formation, quite far from it. But nevertheless, moving it more into the sphere of influence of the fascist United States is hardly a good thing, and creating chaos. This is all that accelerationists or tech accelerationists are going to do, is create chaos and say that it's good because they're moving fast and breaking things. Um, But why would energies being are being only devoted to devilment of this kind when they could be devoted to actually fixing the problems in the form of the real tech accelerationist, the cybernetic communist, who would build um, the high automation planned economy that abolishes private wealth, as a planned economy must, that is capable of stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse. The only kind of thing that's capable of stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse is the building of a people's government and the removing from power of the forces of empire and financial capital. And in my view, and I haven't heard anyone give me a better analysis than this. This thing, so-called artificial intelligence, advanced computing forms, are the only weapons powerful enough to wrest control from these fascistic evildoers and killers of Earth in this 4 or 5 year time frame that remains before we've reached runaway overheating and humanity's fate is sealed. Um, I'll mention some other books that I read in the last few days. I am reading a book now called The Terror Factory Inside the FBI's Manufactured War on Terrorism. And that is by Trevor Aronson. Um, and it's a less Marxist Leninist than the other two books that I mentioned. Um, it is more written by a person who would probably more be described as um, left liberal FBI insider than a socialistic or communistic individual. But nevertheless, it has strident criticisms of these um, and good. There's no way to fight this CIA-run world, this U.S. intelligence agency-run world, this military fascism, without understanding its various organs and shenanigans. And I read quite a lot of books along these lines. And this one is also pretty good, but I'm only a little ways into that book. Um, I started reading a book called The City of the Yellow Devil, uh, which I still don't know exactly what that title is in reference to, the yellow um, or the city. This is a book written some 100 years ago by Maxim Gorky, um, a comrade of this century past, and it's a book that's critical of the United States and its spiritual and actual impoverishment. But I only got a little ways into that book before I decided to um, start reading something else. Not because it was bad, but because I wanted to um, be reading something subjects a little more um, a little more to do with the present day. Um, and uh, well, I was had a meeting, a planning meeting for the Vanguard Progressive Web Application app, um, the building of a portal for this People's Superintelligence, the design specifics and planning and organizing and scaling specifics for building this high automation open source large language model work group are coming together a little more. And so I had a meeting, one of the first of hopefully many to this end. One thing that was discussed is the need for this to be a project of a nonprofit kind and of this open source kind, and to nevertheless be able to scale in a tech ecosystem that where those things are not really prioritized, or really for the most part very much allowed to occur. And we discussed the example of parallel of problematic formation of the Open AI organization, which started out basically as an AI safety board, um, which would be focused on open source use of this specific machine learning type product. But the second that it began to scale, it was infiltrated by financial capital, and now it's become a thing as bad as any other as a result. So that's the thing to avoid. If you would build something like a people's superintelligence designed to put pressure um, on these fascistic forces that are killing the planet Earth, it's a necessity that thing not be co-opted by those forces. But it's also a necessity that we build something powerful enough in this time frame, and that means large enough in this time frame. Um, and so this is a tricky problem. It's bleak world that we live in. This U.S. dominated, CIA-run military-industrial complex friendly world, and tech reflects those failings. You can scarcely find a public-facing technologist or technophile who is not pretty pretty visibly more interested in protecting these fascistic formations than they are in actually using this powerful tool to help people. They pay mere lip service to these things, as I said, but their actual ideology and work reflects something very different. The counterproductive qualities there. Ray Kurzweil would be an example, right? Ray Kurzweil works. He's basically the chief technological officer working at that level in Google, which is a military contractor and super polluter itself, and a part of this vast $1 trillion a year abomination. And everything that he says about the state of human affairs is a half truth or a lie. He frequently has said, and has said for many decades, that humanity has gotten better in this neoliberal world at taking care of one another. And that's a pretty an intentional obfuscation of problems like um, the economic shock therapy of the 1990s, where 10 to 15 million people in the former Soviet Union starved to death. Many millions of people in other countries starved to death because of this conversion of systems from those that were deployed to take care of the people in those countries into those that only concerned with the accrual of filthy lucre, these private wealth formations. Ray Kurzweil says that private wealth and a tech acceleration outcome are one and the same. But those people who believe that sort of thing are intentionally, as CIA assets will tend to do, or unintentionally self-sabotaging, um, because the problems of capitalism are vast, and the mere acceleration into a hyper-capitalist formation with those same exploitative and omnicidal outcomes is no plan of attack for helping humankind, and it's pretty ridiculous that almost everyone who engages with techno-futurist lines of thought is handicapped by this intellectual dishonesty of this capitalist realist. You should read Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism, that book. Put a link to that as well. But this level of intellectual dishonesty, this tech people are quite uniformly deluded, and Um, but doing the better thing is possible. We should not disregard uh, the possibility of using advanced systems more correctly in the formation, like a people's superintelligence. Many scientific socialists and scientific communists say because the level of corruption amongst these people is so high that the sectors themselves are a non-starter. Um, I don't share that opinion, but I do have more respect for the person who is a technophobic scientific communist willing to fight for a humane and sustainable world, but not willing to recognize that advanced computing is the most powerful revolutionary weapon for the 21st century. For one thing, as we're looking at this timeline, from moving from 2024 to 2025 on up to 2029, when runaway overheating, around the time when runaway overheating would be reached, it's extremely likely that humankind will begin to recognize and uh, create different social formations in response to this problem. And some such social formations could very well be the traditional people's revolution, um, um, not using advanced computing. So it's extremely likely that those scientific communists who are technophobic could be proven right. Um, but my view is that unless you are a leader with many millions of fellow technophobic scientific communist followers, which no such person exists to my knowledge, that you make a bad mistake by not embracing advanced computing as the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history. You're handicapping yourself, not handicapping yourself in the way that the techno-fascist that I described is handicapping themselves, but nevertheless not doing your absolute best, in my view. Um, and to build this people's superintelligence requires a better understanding of the open source environments and a better particular kind of development, especially tailoring the open source large language model or models to work together so that the individuals overseeing this work, human individuals, are able to do more with less, and that the AI agents are able to work tirelessly, not only tirelessly, but actually doing work product of use, uh, not just of use to the personal economic betterment of the individuals concerned, but actually of use to human beings by creating this true AI alignment, which necessarily is a thing that is aligned with the fight for a humane and sustainable economic system and the building of cybernetic systems that better serve human needs. Um, and there is no way through this set of problems without strong challenges to this doomed, omnicidal, U.S. focused fascistic status quo. And um, the persons like technologists who are generally fond of corporations or governments are pretty intentionally participating in a psyop to prevent the actual building of a sustainable world. And this is by and large what AI and tech is this capture of these sectors on behalf of this techno-fascistic U.S. system. So we must fight against that and destroy that, and we must build this consensus in the public square where tech is not merely a shortened form of U.S. techno-fascist, but actually refers to the building of things like a people's superintelligence, the use of AI as the most powerful revolutionary weapon instead of the use of the accelerating of the problem um, in in this most counterproductive of things. Um, This mustn't necessarily then become a global movement for people's superintelligence, and it must necessarily be a decentralized movement, not because it's beyond the pale that state actors could act responsibly in these ways, not obviously referring to the fascist U.S. or North Atlantic powers, but other state actors. It's not beyond the pale. But I give the example of Salvador Allende from 1971 to 1973 was building a technological planned economy for Chile, and the fascist West and fascist U.S. saw that and said this is a threat to private wealth and to our fascistic power. We cannot allow a technological planned economy that works to come into existence that would inspire the world in the ways that the USSR and other first forays into lowest level state socialism inspired the world to build things like public health services and housing authorities that helped a lot of people. But fascists don't care about that. They only care about power and money. Um, and so, and of course, the Soviet Union still existed at that time and was still able to put some of that pressure on, in spite of the fact that the major failing of Soviet unions or lowest level state socialist forms has always been that they are constantly beset on all sides, attacked by imperialists, fascists. The U.S. In the 1917 to 1923, roughly, so-called Russian Civil War. Its role was significant there. It was becoming this global anti-communist and fascist force at that time instead of merely an imperialist force. And so all of these imperial powers formed into a kind of Voltron, Transformers super robot instead of their mere constituent imperial robot forms, fighting against state socialism because for the same reason that Chile was destroyed, because they did not even want any single human being to imagining anything other than a world dominated by financial capital and empire. Um, and so this is the U.S.'s legacy is destroying a technological planned economy, destroying other moves towards technological parity along these lines. A technological planned economy would have quite quickly led to things like a people's superintelligence. I think that were it not for the fascist United States specifically and these operations of the ruling elites of the North Atlantic powers and more fascistic powers generally, that we would have seen an AI takeoff, a people's AI takeoff around the year 2010 or even slightly before, were it not for the fascist U.S. So the builders of the ostensible builders of superintelligence, the bourgeois superintelligence of today, are in fact the people who have thwarted the real superintelligence at every turn, represent the same interests. So the thief never becomes the owner, right? And the destroyer never becomes the builder. It's not in their nature. And that is what the U.S. is, and that is what the U.S. Technologist and technophile is. Um, there is no potential, absolutely no potential, for these people who are viewed as the leading figures of AI to actually build the things that they say they would build. By and large, these are con men. They are con men, no different from any other um, um, uh, uh, robber baron or oligarch or a pernicious force of financial capital on a lesser scale. Um, the the problems of building this open source large language model into the workforce formation are considerable. I have tended in these conversations to focus on the need for communities and scaling, but if it was a simple matter of building a thing like this multi-agent system out of open source large language models in um, um, in 2024 from based on the current state of AI agents, this would already be done. There are communities beginning to do this, such as Hugging Face and GitHub and others, doing some of this. And there are for-profit concerns or fascistic state concerns sticking their toe in the building of multi-agent systems as well. Um, but we have to do better than all of those things, as I've said. Um, but if it were just a simple matter of scaling and building a movement, um, um, I think some more of that would already be happening. So more development needs to go into the technical side of this. Um, and well, I hope that I've given you some things to think about in terms of a vision for a cybernetic communist world, a world where um, advanced computing is used correctly as this most powerful of revolutionary weapons to build a humane and sustainable economic system on a planet that without this precise thing, the fight for a humane and sustainable AI-run economic system, um, uh, humans are very likely to be extinct or to do this genocidal thing where billions of brown-skinned folks die for the sins of the European descended fascist pig. Um, and that is a contrived set of circumstances. The United States, you say, why did the United States corporations lie to the public, the domestic U.S. public about the omnicide? Um, why would they feel comfortable bringing about the likely extinction of humankind? Well, because they recognize that the United States is geographically isolated enough and might have the natural resources and the infrastructure to weather this storm to a much higher degree than other places. So they're quite happy killing billions and billions of people to maintain their power and wealth. If there's a chance that they would die, um, they're willing to take that chance because um, um, there's also a chance that they will just merely kill billions of black people and brown people, and that they would come out above the fray. Now this is a genocidal set of activities and mind frame, not dissimilar from that of Christopher Columbus, who landed on some islands with guns and cannons and forced island folks onto latifundia plantations or off of the islands into mines and worked them to death, worked entire island populations completely to death. These island people are no longer known to us and no longer exist except in some genetic remnants in other populations um, because of the Christian fascist and capitalist form that had its germ in these actions of people um, like Christopher Columbus. And that's the, that represents the destruction of dozens or hundreds of genocides, the total annihilations of populations. Um, and and as bad as that is, what folks like Exxon and Shell oil and all of these fossil fuel concerns have intentionally done to the world is worse. causing the death of many, many billions, if not all of humankind, including themselves. There's no real rhyme or reason to the fascist or bourgeois formation. It's a mindless behemoth um, focusing on accruing private wealth at any cost, and by its nature destroying the things that it requires for its economic formation, human lives and the environment. And this has been done so successfully that we are now at the point of total oblivion capitalist at the hands of the capitalist climate apocalypse. Desperate times do indeed call for desperate measures, and I would say that the thing is to build this people's superintelligence that could not just stop the capitalist climate apocalypse, but could build something powerful enough to create full techno communism, full cybernetic communism in our time, which would bring about good results well beyond the mere stopping of the capitalist climate apocalypse, like the building of public health services that are single payer, but also able to treat AI, being AI run, able to treat disease and decrepitude to such a degree that we could bring about this experience of not just longevity escape velocity for high net worth individuals, not just radical life extension for some few people, as um, as the radical life extensionists of the Western world today are tending to be focused on, but bringing about universal super longevity by this itself a workforce multiplier of the AI run single payer public health service that's able to extend that to all and thus better provide for those higher net worth individuals as well. Just as the logic of financial capital puts the capitalist in a position of killing himself, the logic of the life extensionist puts them in the position of spending a tremendous amount of money on the thing that would be better done by the more collectivist approach. Um, this has been well understood. You know, in 1883, Germans were able to bring about in that country the first formations of this single-payer public health service concept, and by the early 20th century, because of the actions of the Soviet Union and a push toward this lowest level state socialism, this public health service form was well understood and functioning well. At that point, it should have become a commonplace among all communities that this multiplier of the public health service was a major driver of longer lifespans and human betterment. But of course, the bourgeois propaganda and the other functioning of fascistic evil was able to undermine those things to such a degree that one of the examples of state capitalist limited successes, the National Health Service of the UK, just as the UK has left the European Union and allied itself more with the fascist United States, it has undermined its National Health Service into a more neoliberal formation like that of the U.S. death care system that kills 100,000 people a year at present. Many thousands of people are demonstrably dead in the UK because of the shift toward this more fascistic death care system. The duplicity and insanity of the ruling elites and the financial capital formations should never be underestimated. But we can do the better things to such a degree that I think we could see this AI takeoff that should have happened by 2010 in a short few years if we have the courage of our convictions and the intellectual honesty, and most importantly, building a mass formation, actual collectivization. It doesn't matter what you think, it doesn't matter how smart you are, if you don't, if we are not able to overcome this poison of individualism and build this thing that is necessary for the survival of humankind, which requires that kind of cooperation. We can see those better things well beyond even, I think, universal super longevity. Miracles, great miracles, could derive from this people's AI takeoff. The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, my dear comrade, very soon techno communism will win.